just awkwardly waiting a few seconds just to make sure we are indeed recording, and I think we are. Alrighty, so darkest of bleatings, everybody. As you can see, I have managed to get Adam Nevill on the channel today, and I'm really excited about it, as I'm sure all of you are. You were a much requested author for me to interview, Adam, just so you know. For those who have been living under a rock, Adam is an author of numerous works. Amongst those works are 12 excellent novels that I have laid out all around me in case I want to, you know, show them to the camera, 3 short story collections in print, and then a whole bunch of other short fiction elsewhere. And he also does an excellent newsletter, which you should subscribe to so you can keep up to date on all the new releases. An award-winning author, numerous awards, and my personal favourite. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you here, Adam. Thank you very much, and welcome.
Well, thank you for such a wonderful introduction, and to everyone that wanted to hear me gibber and digress, and as I tend to do. They may regret the requests.
No, people are very excited to hear you talk. And the first thing I really wanted to talk about with your books, because this is a conversation an ongoing conversation with all my friends that I've turned onto your writing, because I've been sort of emphatically going, read Adam Nevill since I read The Ritual, which was my first read of yours. And then I carried on going forwards, and then I backtracked through the older works. I'm always in text conversations with people about how scared they are, because people tend to read at night and when it's creepy. And I wanted to talk to you about your construction and how you go about doing scary scenes, and also when you're thinking about constructing a scary premise, because there are several scenes that just jump out at me that will never leave me from all of your books, really. There's the cabin scene in The Ritual. Basically the entirety of No One Gets Out Alive. There's a scene in Last Days when something's crept into his room in the night. And yeah, there's something for every book. I could list scenes all day. Oh, and the opening of The Reddening. That was chilling. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what your thought process actually is when you're writing scenes where you're trying to really scare us.
Okay. Well, it's not that complicated. Thank you, by the way, for being affected by that. It's very hard to scare a reader. You're never going to scare every reader. And I think if you try too hard to scare readers, it can become contrived very quickly. I guess I always write about things that I find disturbing. So that requires a degree of honesty with myself. And I do sometimes go quite deep into things that I find disturbing, and I take it seriously, even if it's patently absurd what you're writing. You know, take it seriously. And I guess I get into the zone, and I really do inhabit in my imagination what it would be like to be in one of these awful situations. And you know, what does it smell like? What's the temperature? What can you feel? What can you see? I have always tried to make things multi-sensory, to make the experience for the characters more vivid. And it comes as a natural consequence of imagining yourself in that position. And I guess as well, I kind of, some places I've lived, places I've seen, encountered, experienced, you know, I remember them, and I remember a sense of how they made me feel, almost as if they had a presence that was communicating on some level that wasn't language. And I often think about things quite abstractly.
Mm-hmm.
And just being in some places leads me to imagine what you might call a set piece or a scenario, or it provokes an idea of what might have been there or happened there, or might still be lingering as some kind of presence in a place. And, you know, I file them all away in my memory and reintroduce them into stories. So I'm honest with what I find disturbing. I want the scenes to be credible.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to feel real. So there's that element of truth. I take it seriously, and I inhabit it as much as I can in a physical sense in my imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, and kind of when I'm in the zone and I'm writing, my engine is warm. They just appear. It's probably the easiest part of writing, and the most enjoyable.
Mm.
Ideas that's the easy bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's making it work in language.
Yes, the execution.
That's difficult. The composition, and of course you keep looking at it. I'm an inveterate rewriter. I go back again and again, and I'm not satisfied until I'm describing. I'm saying what I want to say in a particular way. I just have to keep revisiting it.
Yeah, you redraft a lot, don't you? I've heard you talk about that.
Yeah. I don't know how people can write without rewriting.
It's my favorite bit. I enjoy editing and then like how can I make my scene better and
Yeah.
yeah, so you have a really great way of sort of engaging all of the senses for a reader because like you talk about sound especially. I don't know what it is about the way that you describe sound that makes it so that I can hear it when I'm reading it, and smells as well. And I did mention to you your short story Yellow Teeth just got under my skin for all of the smell reasons. And there's a great story. It's in, I want to say Hasty for the Dark. It's not, is it? Some Will Not Sleep.
Someone not sleep.
Some Will Not Sleep. It's in this book. This excellent collection here, about a guy who has a unfortunate flatmate, and I think a lot of people can relate to living with somebody that they find gross in some way or annoying in some way, and this guy is all of those. But that story I read years ago, and I still think about it every now and then, and I'm just like, the Last Days, I was really, really scared reading Last Days, and I was so delighted because I read so much horror fiction. I'm hardly ever actually frightened anymore. It takes quite a lot, but you have managed to do it at least once in everything you've written for me.
Oh,
So
that's wonderful. That is a true accolade. So thank you.
I know I speak for a lot of your other readers as well, because this is a fun topic of discussion, is like how you actually frighten people with your books. The scene in the ritual when having the nightmares and all of that, I thought they did a good job in the film, but it just wasn't it. And it was scary in the film, but I just, for everyone that said, oh, I loved that scene in the film, it's so scary, I was like, you have to read the book. It's so much worse. Like for fear. I think you're very good at sort of eliciting empathy as well with the way you write. So not just feeling sorry for characters that are in these situations, but really feeling like you are the character in the situation. And I felt that a lot in this glorious book, All the Fiends of Hell, which I never read the back cover synopsis for anything. I always go into books blind, especially yours, because I'm pretty much guaranteed to like them. And so I thought, I didn't know what was actually going on for the longest time, because I didn't know that it was decided what was going on, if that makes sense. I had some theories. I thought it might be aliens, or it might be, actual hell, or all sorts of things. So yeah, I was very scared for
You know, that's a really interesting point. I think you said something similar in your review, and it made me go back and think, because I agonized when I wrote the cover copy. Do I mention that this is a novel of alien horror?
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, wouldn't this be a better reading experience if you just started reading it, and it would really kind of reinforce the mystery or the enigma? The whole book is about enigma. What has happened? What is happening? But with metadata and the way that you position books now, I kind of felt I had to put some sort of suggestion of the content, the ingredients. You know, how much sugar is in this? How much salt is in this? It's tricky now when you look at book listings, because people glance at them and they're so important. And I thought, well, actually, its main selling feature for me is that it is a novel of alien horror. So I decided to put it in. But then when I read your review, and you've just reminded me now, I just thought, yeah, but it might have been a better reading experience if readers didn't know at all what to expect.
I don't know, because I only have my first reading experience to go by, but I think that if I'd known concretely that it was alien horror, that might have even made it like scarier. Because you know, like when you're between two things, like realizing that towards the end that that's absolutely what it was, I was like, oh my god, we're all doomed. So yeah, it was a great story. I've been assuring my cousin that it's safe to read because she's very sensitive about anything that has children in the plot, full stop. So yeah, won't talk too much about the actual plot, but I was like, it's okay, you can read it. Go in slightly armed, but you know, you can read it. I asked her if she had any questions for you, and she said no, she's fangirling too much. She can't think of anything smart to ask you, so just to pass on her compliments.
Oh, well, thank you. Whoever you may be, thank you for appreciating.
I was wondering about with your. I've noticed as I've been reading your work going along that I suppose this is true for a lot of, especially horror, but a lot of your stories are centered around like one person dealing with something like all by themselves, like something no one else tends to believe. I suppose The Ritual is an exception, but we're still in the head of someone that's experiencing all of this stuff. So we've Lost Girl, No One Gets Out Alive, especially Apartment 16. And I was just wondering if because I know you go like kayaking and stuff, don't you? I assume you spend time alone when you're outdoors. So does that sort of put you in the headspace of I'm not wording this very well, Adam. I don't have your talent for words and story and sentence construction.
Don't
Yeah.
short sell yourself.
Does spending time alone help you think about how to be in the head of someone who is alone dealing with an issue when you're writing?
Yeah, by the way, I never kayak alone. Very dangerous to do. Always kayak in a group. We have a saying, fewer than three, there should never be.
Yeah.
Camping I've done with other people as well. Walking, nearly all of my walking, I've walked large swathes of the southwest coast path and Dartmoor. Most of that was done alone. So yeah, I guess I do. Again, I'm in situations, and if I'm alone, because I just think so abstractly, I think about situations and locations. I will imagine what it would be like to endure something or experience something uncanny here. Alone. It makes it more powerful in a way, I think. It really sort of focuses the terror, I guess, into one consciousness that is confronting something inexplicable.
Yeah.
And I mean, some novels like, Apartment 16, that was informed by, I guess, my first period in London. I was really alone almost all of the time. I hardly knew anyone in the city, and I was working night shifts as a night watchman. So I was asleep when everyone was awake.
Yeah.
In the day, and I was awake at night when everyone was asleep. In the biggest city in Europe that I moved to in 1999, my first couple of years were tough. What that does to you psychologically.
Yeah,
it produced a reasonable horror novel. But for years afterwards, parts of that period of my life, you know, did find their way into other short stories and novels as well. So yeah, you draw upon your own experience of isolation. I do at times. Experiences, observations, you know, it all goes into the mix. Things you've read, it all combines and produces something at some point in one of your own stories. Interesting, you mentioned, I think, that a house in the ritual and the scene when they had the dreams. Like, I did go on a disastrous camping expedition in Wales, of all places, in 1993. Poorly equipped, ill prepared, pre-internet, not such accurate weather forecasting, and we ended up in the dark, in the snow, and the wood we'd hoped to camp in had nettles at like neck height. You couldn't even get through the tree line, but on the front of the tree line were the bodies of 2 dead sheep hanging from trees.
Oh my God.
And we camped not there. We had to find another place. We camped in the snow, didn't sleep at all. I nearly died of hypothermia. I was in a bad way. But that experience, how not to camp, early 20s, group of friends, you know, I conflated with when I was backpacking through Sweden, backpacked in Sweden and Norway. I found in a housing museum, huge outdoor museum in Stockholm, they had relocated one of the oldest stugas or fritted houses. These were the small wooden houses that the Swedes and Norwegians lived in up by the Arctic Circle, all the way through the country, but it had come from right up north, plank by plank, and they'd reassembled it in this housing museum. And it was one of the most cramped and claustrophobic and evil smelling buildings I'd ever been in. In which the beds were built into the walls like coffins.
Oh God!
And the people were so small back then. I mean, it's hundreds of years old. They would have just slotted themselves into these old smoke blackened walls. So those two things came together.
Yeah.
The house I'd seen in the housing museum years later, 2008, I wrote The Ritual. So that trip to Sweden was about 2003, and the camping trip was 93. So you know, eventually it finds a place.
Yeah, works its way in eventually.
Eventually, I answer a question as well.
Oh, well,
you just have to be patient.
Eventually, I actually get to my question after a ramble.
No, it's good. It's good. I find it all very interesting to hear your feedback. I mean, you are one of my ideal readers. Okay. So I was just thinking then, well, yeah, I mean, like, and the people that subscribe to my newsletter, I'm very lucky to count you as readers, because you, whatever I write, you will try it without reading the cover copy. But going back to what I was saying earlier with the cover copy, I think that decision in the end to reveal the overall conceit that involved an alien invasion, when you position and present a book, you're kind of looking for readers as well who are new readers.
Yeah.
Who have never read you but might be attracted to this book, or you know, people that come in and out, they've read a few of your books but not all of them. Oh, this one might appeal to them. So you kind of have to give a certain amount of necessary information in the copy and the metadata.
Yeah.
But I think your reading experience for me would be ideal, is that someone just picked up that book and just went in
Yeah.
and heard those church bells.
Oh God, so I was gonna move that segues nicely. So this is sort of a not a departure because your writing style and like the way you get these things across is the same, but you've written a lot of sort of like folk horror, that kind of subgenre. So this is something different subgenre wise for you. Can we expect more of this kind of ilk?
I just think whatever I'm kind of compelled to write, I'll just write it. So yes. I've written. I mean, I've even combined things. Like No One Gets Out Alive is a ghost story. It's a story about apparitions and hauntings and presences, but it's also, there you go. First time I'd written about a serial murderer, but in a particular way, to make it very kind of, well, to present it more as it actually is. I think there was a real glamour hanging around serial murder. I found almost in crime fiction for years. They'd assumed a kind of anti-hero role or folk hero role. But having read a great deal of true crime, they really are the most vile, dismal, grubby individuals and misfits you would ever have the misfortune to meet or be abducted by. So I wanted to kind of roll it back to a true crime level. So that was kind of serial killer and a haunting, but then it also had the folk element. What I used to think of in my books, and it's in so many of them, is pagan horror or paganism.
Yeah.
It's now sort of assumed the mantle of folk horror, which is probably better. So that book was a sort of a combination of almost three, as you would say, subtypes or subgenres of supernatural horror fiction. And then others, I guess, Last Days, it's a combination of the demonic with cult horror.
Yeah.
So I will always change things up, you know, and occasionally just roll the dice and take a bit of a risk. The collection Weird and Other Derelictions didn't have any characters in it. Something that I'd wanted to try for 20 years or more, and finally did it.
This is one of my favorite things you've ever written. And I was at FantasyCon last year, and this was talked about during a panel on. Yes, I meant to tell you that.
And what not to do in horror?
No, about risks that writers take that really pay off. So, yes, an author called Richard Clive, who's new, cited this as like a major influence on experimenting with like not feeling boxed in by, you know, like the rules of writing. And I've been recommending this to anyone that will listen to me. And I think it's a particularly great book for people who also write as well as read, because you'd think a book full of stories that have no characters couldn't possibly be scary, but somehow terrifying. And so interesting. You're sorry, this has like gone off my plan for what I wanted to ask you about a bit, but yeah, you're that's one of the things I love the most about your writing, is that even when you are writing in like similar subgenres or whatever, you never get the same story twice, and also you experiment with style quite a bit. So there's obviously that. So hard to explain this one to people. I'm just like, just read it, guys. Just get it. And then also The Vessel. I loved the style that you wrote this in, because there was no like real inner monologue for this, was there?
No. I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people didn't like the style that one was written in. Looking at the reviews, But no, thank you for liking them both.
Oh, I'm not the only
That
one.
vessel was another experiment. Can you remove the interior of characters and still write a story, but still convey to the reader exactly what they're feeling?
Yeah, and I thought that you succeeded because,
Right.
firstly, I didn't realize that that's what you were doing until I was near the end, and I was like, wait a minute, there's been no internal monologue. And then, but I was still really scared. There's a particular scary scene, but I don't want to say where it is because it's towards the end, so I don't want to, it could go into spoiler territory. But I thought it was usually the fear for me as a reader anyway comes out of how the protagonist is feeling. Because if someone just says, "Oh, this thing appeared and this person was scared," it doesn't really do anything for me. But it's it's the way you describe things, and I thought it was pretty impressive that you managed to scare me so much in a book where we're not even in the protagonist's head, really. So I recommend it. I think it's a great book. If I can go back to No One Gets Out Alive. Now, I have talked excessively about this, so I won't go on about it too much right now. But this is kind of going back to the sort of topic of empathy, I suppose. I thought that this is the best example of your work, I think, but it's in all of your work, where you're great at putting someone in the reader in the mindset of someone who's not only dealing with something alone, but they're dealing with something that's unbelievable to other people alone. And I think there's kind of a universal component to, like, everyone has felt lonely at some point. And I would imagine that most people have been in a scenario where people haven't believed them or that haven't believed their version of things. And I appreciated the exploration of PTSD basically in this because it was very relatable to people who've gone through something traumatic that no one else would believe. Well, no, I'd never gone through something this traumatic, but or this unbelievable. But yeah, I just can't imagine how you get, like, I try to sort of mine my own life experiences for emotions I'm trying to explore a bit more deeply, but I'm trying to think of what my actual question here is. Do you draw a lot from sort of life, or do you also employ like a lot of imagination for things? Because you've never been a woman, presumably, living in a situation like this. So, to my knowledge, Adam, in my research, yeah, I thought the way that you sort of conveyed the things that are very particular to fears that women have, I thought that you really communicated that excellently, because it's quite hard to explain to a man most of the time why certain things about men are scary. And that's really like simplifying what you wrote there, but yes, I constantly felt under threat with every page of that book. I don't think I had a question, Adam. Sorry about that. I just wanted to gush about the book.
I think it was you were alluding to gender.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
As a male author.
Yeah, or not even only as a male author, but just if you're writing these sort of very deep experiences that you might not have actually experienced yourself. I was wondering how you approach doing something like that.
Well, I think I think it's several things. There are variables to that. I mean, in that particular character, I did a lot of research into women who had been the victims of sadistic predators. So there was that kind of secondary reading, which was some of it was so disturbing it was almost unreadable. You know, these are true crime books that you can buy from any bookshop or take out of a library. In fact, I was so morbid at one point, sort of going down rabbit holes and reading obsessively about these dreadful human beings who had, you know, held people captive and so forth. It's the only book of mine my wife stepped in and said, you know, you've turned really morbid. And you're talking about things that, and I just thought, well, I am, you know. So there was reading, there was being informed about the subject, and I was very sensitive about writing about a female character who was a victim as a male writer. So also bringing into that development of the character and the situation and her reactions to everything. You know, I've known women, I've observed them, and then
in a creepy way.
so I can, in normal, healthy ways, but that has informed me about, you know, issues of privacy and personal security and vulnerability and what things as women are susceptible to that men aren't. You know, it's a different ball game, and obviously female friends and girlfriends or what have you have confided things to me about times they felt really uncomfortable or someone has freaked them out and gone through some just ordinary women, just gone through terrible things.
Yeah.
You know, that I never recorded and never reported. It's part of a woman's experience.
Yeah.
So
sorry, go on.
Oven gloves, you know, this is a contentious area. So what I was really careful, I didn't want any of it to appear titillating. There's nothing sexy about this book. And I didn't want to be too sensational, exaggerate anything. I wanted this to feel vivid and real. And I think at a basic kind of human level, the differences between men and women in those situations, a lot of them just evaporate. We're just frightened human beings who are trapped and going through all kinds of emotions of terror and despair and a sense of futility and this terrible, almost like passivity that overtakes people when they've given up. So, yeah, eventually when I was writing those scenes, I wasn't thinking about gender. I was just thinking about what would it like to be a person, a reasonable, sensitive, ordinary person who just found themselves in a situation, set of circumstances in which they had no control. You know, and the malignant and the malicious, you know, and there are numerous people like this, had all the agency, or nearly all of it, and it took a lot out of me, that book. When I finished it, I just felt drained, and then I went straight into writing Lost Girl, and I was a father of a toddler.
Oh my
imagining
God.
not just the consequences of runaway climate change, which are ever prescient, but you know, all my paranoia about my daughter's safety also poured out. It had to come out, and it came out in that book. So those two books, written more or less in 2 years, a year per book. That with Pan Macmillan, they wanted a book every year. I deliver a book every year. It's hard to do, but I did feel kind of burnt out and exhausted and a bit flat. And I questioned all kinds of things about, you know, is this a good idea? Making yourself imagine these things at such length and in such detail. But of course, you know, years later, I look back and think, oh, I'm so glad I wrote those books in that way and that intensely. And then you know, readers who have read them and were affected by them, it makes it all worthwhile.
It was really emotionally honest. No One Gets Out Alive is where I felt like it wasn't like some sort of caricature of a scenario. It was very much like what actually happens. And I thought that what you really nailed in that is just like the fear that comes with like the uncertainty of you don't know what's going to happen because you're not in control of it. And I also think that this is across the board with your books as well. You're really good at just sort of communicating like the internal struggle that somebody has when they are doing everything they can to get themselves out of a horrible situation, and they just can't. And it's a point in a lot of novel. You know, there are a lot of stories, films, and novels and stuff that you can read, and you're like, oh well, why don't they just ABC? Like the answer is obvious, but you do a great job of exploring these people taking all of those options, and just the doors are being slammed in their face at every turn. So it's creates this real feeling of I never know what you're going to do in one of like I never know where it's going. I know a lot of people cite The Ritual as a great example of the book takes a turn you don't expect, which I don't want to ruin for everyone because I loved it. It was so good. But yeah, there's a lot of like just uncertainty, and like when you're able to like relate to a protagonist so heavily, it's very scary to read. Because
Great to hear. Thank you.
good.
Yeah, I think
Sorry,
above
Anna.
all, be credible. If you're, I'm not a fan of heroism in fiction unless it's depicted credibly. I think a lot of genre fiction, you know, it's based on kind of wishful thinking. And I often think, well, these are ordinary people, and they would react surely in the way that ordinary people would react, and just always follow that thread. Yeah, and there's always a tension, because if I'm disturbing natural law and I'm introducing something into a story that is supernormal or supernatural, I find that's much easier to accept if you've established a character, whether the reader likes them or not, but a reader finds them credible and can believe in this character. It's a risk, you know, to create realistic people that are on the border of likability or disagreeability, but it helps with when you introduce something, you know, unnatural, that if you were to analyze it alone outside of the story, it would be ridiculous. So I often do think, as I'm writing, this is just ridiculous. How do I make it less ridiculous? And it's often through the reaction of the character behaving as we would behave. You know, very few of us are heroes. And I do read quite a lot of memoir. I read a lot of military history, and I read a lot of memoirs. I'm reading one at the moment about an American Marine who fought his way through the Pacific Islands all the way to Okinawa, the Japanese home islands. And what they went through, these men, they were teenagers and men in their early 20s. It almost defies belief, the level of suffering they went through. Civilian soldiers that volunteered, you know, that had never been out of their home states. And that informs my writing. You know, like The Ritual, what those characters, what they felt, how they reacted, what they went through, you know, so much of that. Yeah, I've been miserable camping and made mistakes camping, but I need to know more than that. You know, that's the basis. And reading a lot of military history, I'm interested in what people went through, both combatants and civilians. And that's why it's so important to read around a subject, and also read a variety of books. Like what we were talking earlier about making writing sensory, I read a lot of poetry. I recommend, you know, writers, horror writers, read poetry. Poets, good poets, they're masters of language. You know, their work is the compression in it, and the poetry. I wouldn't have been able to write The Vessel or The Derelictions had I not read so much poetry from my teenage years onwards.
God, that's so interesting. I never thought of
And I think the best writers you come across, prose writers, are poets. They're often natural poets. It's why I think the quality of writing can be so high in short stories because often short story writers are also poets.
Yeah.
So I've always been interested in novels. I'd always consider myself a novelist before anything else. I've always been interested in the novel. In fact, by the time I'd finished Banquet for the Damned, I think I'd only written about 3 short stories. So I didn't have the usual process as you write lots of short stories and then you try a novel. I was into the novel right from the start. That's what I suppose I enjoy reading them more.
Yeah.
As well, that led me to it. But I've always wanted to try and combine the storytelling of novelists and that scope.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got that space to explore the interior worlds of characters. That's the great advantage of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And you can comment upon time and place more so. But I would say what's more important to me is the quality of the writing.
Yeah.
And so I love poetry and reading a good poet. I'm reading and rereading at the moment Ted Hughes, who on balance is probably my favourite poet. He's just incredible. His turns of phrase, they're just blinding. Poem after poem after poem. He wrote, in fact, I'll show you the book. This was a man's, his collected poetry.
Wow.
This was a man's life's work. I think he died in his 60s. But
a lot of
you know, if anyone wants to know how to write, you read people like Ted Hughes. Cormac McCarthy's another one, classic example. That was a poet. He was a poet writing novels. So he was a novelist and he was a poet and a dramatist. He had it all.
Yeah, I'm thinking about his writing style now, actually.
They're the sort of writers that make you want to give up because you'll never be as good. Are the ones to read and to aspire to be, just to emulate some of their skill, or to try and attain it yourself with your own stories.
Yeah, sometimes I like to try and guess when I'm reading a novel who the author's favorite writers are, and sometimes you can tell. I think that I got a pretty good sense of when someone's favorite author is Stephen King, because they tend to be very like character centric, and they're not afraid to go off on like little character tangents. And that is not that Stephen King's the only person that does that, but he's very famous for that. And I'm a big Stephen King fan, so I feel like I see it in other people. And then people who read, Ramsey Campbell, and I always say the guy's first name wrong, so I just say Blackwood.
Algernon Blackwood.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't pronounce. I didn't know if it was a hard or soft G, so I've been saying Blackwood this entire time. And then I was recently reading, I was trying to find the first ever Gothic horror book. So I've gone back to like the 1700s with like the Monk and the Castle of Otranto and things like that. And yeah, it's good to read a lot of writing styles if you're a writer, especially an aspiring writer. I think you're a big influence to me. I will never have this level of skill with the written word, Adam, but I'm hoping that I can pluck some of your well, not steal your style, but pluck tips out of it is what I mean.
Well, if I've ever written something that makes someone want to write as well, that's that's very flattering. That's very satisfying, because the good writers make me want to write, but they often make me think I should give up.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
It's a contradiction, isn't it? They make you want to write, but then when you start writing, you feel like setting fire to it.
Yeah.
But you persevere and you read and you rewrite and you keep at it and you mature and you grow. Mm-hmm. It's something you have to do your whole life.
Yeah, it's a weird process where you finish reading a really good book and you're like, I feel inspired to write something now, and you're all charged up, and then when you start typing, you're like, why can't I Word? Word's no good. Well, that's my process anyway.
Yeah, I mean, my mind changes, but the one I'm writing now, I started in January, and I'm just first drafts are battlegrounds. My emotions swing from elation to despair. This one, I'm just approaching everything in a simpler way, not trying to be too clever, not trying to, get the sentences and descriptions halfway there on a first draft. No.
Yeah.
If I'm stuck on something, I'm just leaving a gap, brackets, and going back to it.
Yeah.
Because I'll probably have rewritten every sentence about 7 times by the time this book is eventually completed.
Yeah. Is it a stressful place to be inside your head when you're actually in the process of working?
Can be.
Yeah. Can imagine, because as well as obviously the writing side is like the enormous part of the work, but you have Ritual Limited that you put your books out under.
Yep.
So you run that side of things as well. So how much of what would you say the sort of percentage of the actual work is the writing part, and then there's all the other stuff as well?
I would say not enough these days.
Everyone's saying that.
I'll be honest, not enough. I mean, I'll give you an example. At the moment, it's great. I'm writing most days a first draft, anywhere between 3 and 5 hours a day. And it just feels great to be writing again. But the 7 preceding months, a combination of life taking over and other parts of what I now call, I guess, my business, publishing, and I also work on film developments. I didn't write, other than a new draft of a screenplay, I didn't write anything for 7 months. So I published these laminate hardcover editions of the Ritual Limited backlist, created these new editions with my text designer and overall designer now for everything, Pete. So we made those. I did my first ebook box set. There was a T-shirt, and then there was the 4 editions of all the Fiends of Hell. There's a lot of publishing, particularly the audiobooks. The audiobooks take longer with the producer and the actor now than the print editions. So that was 7 months, and then life took over. Unfortunately, we had a bereavement in the family, and we moved house. So we moved from somewhere we'd lived for 9 years, 100 yards, to a place that had more room, but it was moving both the house and business premises. That was 7 months. All that publishing, the one new draft of something that was in development had it acquired a new director. So I wrote what's known as the director's pass. And to me, it felt catastrophic. I just felt I used to be a writer. I'm not. I'm a publisher, and I'm a screenplay writer of stuff in development that isn't being made. So sometimes I've published in the afternoon and written in the morning, but the best time for me to write, generally, I can write anywhere at any time, but generally it tends to be the afternoon. I also like to exercise. There's domestic stuff that takes over. So yeah, time. I'm always battling with time. I've been writing now nearly 30 years. I'm still fighting the fight with time and finding the time and space to write. And some people can shut a door and they're not disturbed. I've never had that. So yeah, then for film development, kind of, they go into hiatus, they come out. They go into hiatus, they come out. If one of them comes out of hiatus and there are deadlines, I drop everything. Because usually I've invested 4 or 5 years into this project.
Oh my gosh.
And the one that's I can't talk about it because you don't talk about stuff that's in development in any detail, but it's been going on for 5.5 years, and it's back in a good place. It was in a good place and it was in a terrible place. Now it's back in a good place. So when that is back on my desk, there's screenplays to be rewritten and there's lots of meetings, and I just find I haven't got the headspace for anything but that. Try and split that with writing a novel, and or publishing.
Yeah.
And we also have a web store which has built up over 9 years. We get orders pretty much every day from all around the world. So the orders and the couriers and the post office orders have to be packed and so forth. You can see I'm getting stressed. My hands are waving around. My chest is getting tight.
I'm so sorry.
About my workload. But
I think
yeah. So there's retail, publishing, film, and writing, fiction.
Yeah.
And it's at least 3 full-time jobs in that.
Yeah, like the production side alone, I can only imagine how long it takes when you're like actually putting a book together that looks so beautiful like these.
Yeah.
I think people romanticize the life of a writer, the life of a whole. I think people imagine that you've got a little, you know, some sort of little writing cabin at the end of your property, and you just go down there and shut yourself in, and maybe you drink a wine or a coffee or something, a magical iced coffee that appears out of nowhere, and then you have a lovely creative time, and then you go on with your day. And I feel like that's the image that people have, and the reality. Every time I speak to a full-time writer, they're like, "There's never enough hours in the day." I'm always a little bit stressed, and I never know if I'm going to sell the next book.
Yeah, it's hard work. I wouldn't swap it for anything though. I guess I'm a writer publisher, and I'm starting out the last, I guess, 6 years, kind of starting out into being involved in film developments.
Yeah, exciting.
Yeah, there's other things, you know, have come my way that I just can't do. I've been asked about 4 times to write computer games.
Oh, I'd love to.
I don't know anything about gaming. I don't play games, but the worlds, the stories, and I think, gosh, that would be an amazing experience. But that would mean dropping everything else.
Yeah.
I just, you know, my primary, I guess, creative form is the novel, and then I want them published in a particular way in 5 formats. I mean, if you're just doing ebooks, that's one thing, but doing 3 print editions and an audiobook and the ebook, and everything goes wrong with all of them at some point.
Yeah.
Or constantly. You're constantly redoing stuff. It never ends.
I've edited and well, I've formatted a few things now, and I have learned the joy of formatting in that you can go in and innocently change one thing, or so you think, and then all of a sudden there's an inch gap on the bottom of every left page for no reason.
Yeah.
What is that?
I understood very quickly, even though I worked in publishing for a long time, I didn't know production. I had a vague idea of it. I would go down to the production department and say, "Can I do this, this, and this with the book?" And they'd say, "No, because you can't afford it. It's not on your P&L. You're costing for the book," you know. And they'd explain why. But to actually produce the books. So I guess now it's about 9 different freelancers I pay to create the book. I don't create the books. I pay people to do it, which is very expensive collectively, but they do a good job. But it all has to be project managed and overseen, the kind of critical path of all the editions leading up to the pub date. And also everything has to be checked.
Yeah.
Again and again, because if you ask someone to produce text artwork or what have you, they're not proofreaders. They don't then go and proofread it. You then have to go. So by the time a book is printed, I've probably gone through it line by line about 10 times.
Yeah. So this. Can I briefly just I just want to say I do think that you have the best cover designer. I'm a massive fan of all
the artist, Sam.
Oh, yeah. He's unreal. I'm always really excited for a cover reveal when you have a new book coming out, and I have all of like these are all the same designer, aren't they?
Samuel Araya.
Yeah, he's incredible. I put a little I added not a merch section on Happy Goat Horror, because I don't sell merch, but I made a page for like the people that work in horror that have skills or they make products and stuff, and I listed him on there as an artist I personally vouch for, because I've been looking up. I'd like to get wall prints and stuff, but you know, it's expensive. So, but yeah,
as a store,
yeah,
there are so many brilliant artists, but for me, that's the most, I guess, exciting part of the whole critical path. It takes about 5 months for me to publish a book. In the 5 editions. I mean, I will do some writing and work on films at the same time, but it takes about 5 months. But that, when Sam sends me his sketches,
yeah,
and often it's like, well, I want 5 of them.
yeah.
That's the cover. There
Yeah,
can only be one. Yeah. I love to see what he comes up with.
Yeah, good. What an imagination. When you moved out of traditional publishing into I suppose it's indie publishing, but
Publishing.
yeah. Did you have sort of like a vision for your like branding, or how did you know that you wanted all of your books to look? They don't. Well, no, they do match with the colors and everything. There's like a lovely, when they're all lined up on the shelf next to each other, there's just a beautiful uniformed look to them. Did you know that you wanted to like find a cover artist and stay with that one initially, or did that just happen?
That's a good question. I did have a kind of vision, dare I say, for how I wanted a press purely for my own books to look. My original inspiration with the heavy metal record covers and labels from the 80s, when I really first got into heavy metal. In fact, the logo is designed by a designer of black metal T-shirts and record covers.
Here it is.
I wrote to him and said, would you consider? And he said, yeah. And he produced this. I gave him a brief of what I was looking for, and that came back, and I thought, nailed it.
Yeah, it's a
Just
great.
nailed it. And then for the first cover, because originally I was only going to collect 15 years worth of short stories. I was only going to do 2 books. I didn't want the short stories to go to, there's lots of good indie presses, but I was getting a bit fed up. I was really fed up at that point of how my stuff was being published in some quarters. And then, you know, with some of the indie presses I'd worked with, you know, you write a story for them and it doesn't come out for 4 years, or it never comes out. There was a period where books just weren't coming out.
Yes.
And I thought, no, I'm taking control of this now. My short fiction, I want it presented in a particular way. It might be an expensive failure, and the costs were just racking up through that. Yeah. But no, I'm going to see it through. I'm going to do 2 volumes in a particular way. And for the first cover, I looked at, I think it was about 1,200 artists and portfolios on all kinds of different websites. And I had a massive shortlist. And then I saw, towards the end of that process, I saw a picture on DeviantArt, the big website where artists display their work. And, it was just arresting. And I tracked down the artist, Mr. Treese, and I wrote to him, weirdly, producer of black metal music, who's also an artist. That was this one.
Yes.
And he did that with a spray can.
Wow, really?
Yep. And he wrote back to me and he said, oh, I've read your 4 books in Spanish.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you can have it. Take it. And I was like, well, we'll do it officially and professionally. We'll have a license and I'll pay you for it. And then for the next book, I think my brother did one. My brother did the next book, the first artwork on it, which I liked. My brother's a really good artist. Wanted him to have a go at one. But then I subsequently, after 2 years, decided that the two collections did really well, particularly the first one, and continues to sell year after year. I kind of realised I can't really afford to let anyone else publish me now, and also, you know, having that level of control over everything, I really struggle to let go of that.
Yeah, and you can.
So I did a novel, The Reddening.
Yeah.
And that's when I thought, a regular artist. My number one was Sam.
Yeah.
Who'd read the Ritual and done some artwork that I'd seen online, inspired by the book. So I knew he read me, and we had a connection anyway.
Yeah.
And Sam said yes, and I wrote a brief, what I was kind of looking for. And it was at that point, by the third book, I was starting to think more in terms of an overall branded look. So the books were instantly recognizable as coming from me and being horror and not looking like anything else. But I didn't want them to be over the top. I wanted them to suggest horror, still be slightly abstract. And Sam, that's absolutely perfect at creating that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at them now. I don't even know which one is my favorite. Can't even pick a favorite of these covers. I think it might be this one,
Yeah. Interestingly, this one, the amount of times I've read in reviews, people don't like to look at it and put it face down and side on. They're so disturbed by dear old Flo.
Yeah, dear old Flo.
Dear old Flo.
Do you know, the more you look at her, the worse it gets. That's where it is. I did have this facing out on my shelf initially, but every time I turned around in my computer chair, I was like, oh yeah.
Well, I remember originally when we went through the discussions that Sam and I go through, I think this became a kind of amalgamation of three of his sketches, because I loved this crosshatch of sticks. That was on another picture.
Yeah.
And I loved how he divided, it was on yet another picture, I think. The top half was scarlet and the bottom was pitch black. So I was like, can we have the head with that as a background? And then another sketch had this incredible tiara of flowers, which just made it more hideous.
It does, because it's just.
So that's how we ended up.
It's a pretty little detail that's very disturbing when you pair it with these eyes that look like they're glowing.
There's a juxtaposition between what suggests like a youthful, beautiful maiden in a bucolic, pastoral scene, and then there's that witch face.
Yeah. I feel like this picture encapsulates like Flo through the ages, like through stages in her life. It's such a great cover. I think obviously with if you're self-publishing and you've gone indie and you're running all of this yourself, you've got complete control over everything about your book, from what you can write, because I don't know how mainstream publishing works. I've never worked in it. I've never had a book published in mainstream publishing, but I presumably, if you have contracts with people, I assume it's like music, where every now and then someone will step in and be like, oh, can you actually write something that's a bit more like this, or can you maybe tone that down, or we don't want to put that in a book because people don't want to read, but stop me if I'm talking absolute crap. I feel like you must get so much more freedom for the actual writing process, because you're not likely, you're not going to have someone tell you, oh, we'd like to publish it, but you've made horror.
Well, it's the decision to go indie. I mean, I tested the waters with the two collections of short stories, but I planned at that point all the way through to, I think, nearly 2018, I'd still keep novels with a traditional publisher. And I just used Ritual Limited for short story collections and maybe novellas if I ever had time to write them. But I'm sorry, I've digressed.
No, it's okay.
Question? Oh yes, so the consideration then to carry on with novels was both commercial. It was a business decision because I'd seen what had happened with the two short story collections, but also it was an aesthetic, a creative decision, because traditional publishing is a business. It's a big corporate business, and most publishers are owned by these big media groups, and they're fixated on what's been popular in the last few preceding years, and they will redirect their catalogues and their commissioning to reflect that. They want to catch waves, they want to sustain waves. So there are fads and fashions. Publishing is very capricious. I worked in traditional publishing for 11 years in editorial. And you tend to get publishers publishing in the same areas with the same kind of covers and the same kind of material. And then that will change every few years, or some forms of fiction will continue for a decade or more. I mean, the kind of grip-lit thriller that all came from, I think, Gillian Flynn, Gone Girl, and what have you. That must have continued. Must be 15 years, and it shows no signs of ebbing. On the rare occasion I walk into Smith's or something now, or I look at the books in the supermarket, 98 of them are like that.
Yeah.
And there's 2 celebrity titles, and I think,
yep,
same again. But that world and that kind of capriciousness doesn't affect me being indie. I'm a horror writer. I want to produce a body of work of literary horror. Fiction that straddles both the commercial and the literary. That was always my goal aesthetically, and I've stuck to it. But the interest in horror in publishing and in the book trade, because it's book buyers at the bookshops and sales directors in publishing companies generally determine what is published. To sound really cynical, that's what it comes down to. I sat in publishing meetings for 11 years. Sales directors are the most powerful people in corporate publishing. So when the book trade started to sort of turn its nose up at horror, it was getting overpublished. It came back in 2008. It was already waning by 2012. It was starting to be, I guess, disguised as other things. So if you look at the evolution of my covers, and we go from, so what came, we had No One Gets Out Alive, didn't we? So
I got this.
I guess that's the last one that was really pushed. Well, it wasn't really pushed. That was the last one that was published as a horror novel. And then, although Lost Girl is different in my catalogue in that it's kind of a futuristic thriller. We jump to that. And then the last book we did with them kind of starts to look like it's like a Peter Robinson crime novel.
I've got a different cover for that one. I've got this one.
That was the hardback, But that was another beef I had. Of 8 books, one of them had a hardback, and I think about 2 or 3 had audio books. But I was just thinking, well, every book has got to have a hardback and an audio book. That was another reason I kind of took control of a business. But you can see how tastes are changing. Publishers have got to kind of position horror as crime or thriller or some form of fantasy, whereas if you're independent, I'm going to write exactly. I was never told to write anything. I was never told to not write horror.
Oh, cool.
But I could sense the enthusiasm in the whole book trade and publishing. It was cooling. But the audience for horror, I knew internationally, when viewed internationally, it was huge. And it's always been big in North America, far bigger than the UK. So by not just having a UK publisher who then tries to sell foreign editions into other territories, I've got a press that publishes all the editions worldwide on the same day.
Yeah, that's a great way to make a change from traditional, because a lot of authors would think that that's an insane decision, because the dream for a lot of authors is, oh, I'll get an agent and then a traditional publisher and hopefully I'll have films. And so and people go from indie to that is the way it's thought of, rather than these just being different branches and options that you can explore. Because I don't fit like a ladder. I think indie
it was the ideal for me for a long time. You know, I wrote through the 90s, the 90s. No agents were interested. No one was interested in Banquet for the Damned. I sent it to over 40 agents and not one of them would. Well, I sent not the novel, I sent a letter. Used to send a letter of introduction and request. Are you interested in reading it? They all said no. And it took about 3 years for them all to say no. Don't want to look at 3 chapters. So, you know, that was my goal. And eventually an indie publisher published it, PS Publishing, and that got me an agent. And then 2009, I got my shot at mainstream publishing with a 2-book deal, Apartment 16 and The Ritual. And that process there, you're looking at 15 years of my life. Yeah. But a lot of things changed 2010 and to 12. Ingram Spark and Amazon democratized publishing, made it much cheaper, and broke the monopoly of the big 5 publishers, because now you could produce books and distribute them far more cheaply. Hence the 6,000% increase in publishing ever since. And then, you know, Amazon, not just with its publishing wing, but its platform, its shop front, where pretty quickly 90% plus of all ebooks, half a book sold, were sold on that platform. So huge innovations in Ingram Spark and Amazon that allowed people like me to do what I've done. And I was a Johnny-come-lately. I didn't start till 2016. That was 6 years well into the explosion of kind of indie presses and micro presses. I think what was different for me is I had an existing readership as a mid-list author. And I brought that, as much of that with me as I could, and talk directly to those readers now with a newsletter, social media. But so huge technical innovations, and then audiobooks, which are a format to rival print and ebooks now. They're not a little subsidiary format anymore. You know, there's the big 3, ebook, print, and so huge changes made it possible for lots of writers to go indie. And also, you know, traditional publishing, the goal, the dream of being a traditionally published author, there's a lot of prestige involved with that, I admit it, was very different when even Apartment 16 and The Ritual were contracted and published, all the way through probably up to 2015. It's very different to how it is now. You'll remember traditionally published authors took about an 80% pay cut between 2010 and 20, because the business changed. The bricks and mortar book trade halved. Fewer shelves, fewer shops. Book discounting had already gone up from the end of the net book agreement. So, you know, they're selling books at 65 to 80% discounts to the book trade. So net receipts goes right down, and then the little trickle the authors get out of the net receipts, that was being reduced because of clauses in contracts. So was it all that? If you get a shot at the front list at a traditional publisher, you got to take it. Being a mid-list writer and writing series fiction, there's some prestige, but you know, it can be a real slog. Neither is perfect. You go indie, you're going to spend half your life publishing and marketing. You go trad, you know, you're going to need a full-time job. It's going to be really difficult for that to become a career.
Yeah, do you know, funnily enough, things change so fast in publishing, don't they? Sometimes I've noticed that a few years ago, if you wanted to go traditional, and obviously there's all the hurdles to jump to try and get to that point anyway, but I have noticed more and more in recent years that if you're approaching agents and those like bigger publishers, they want to know what your current audience is and what your sales are, your indie sales. So I feel like there's an expectation to like you're more likely to get signed if you already have done all of the work.
Yep.
Doing the indie work, and you've already got an audience that you can take with you. I see that more and more on agent query forms, especially, is how many books have you sold in your first year, social media handles and things like that, and what kind of audience you have. So
but yeah, they'll look at your profile. How many Instagram followers does this prospective author have? How many TikTok followers?
Yeah.
What audience are they bringing with them?
Yeah.
And you still see these mega deals made with someone that's a TikTok star.
Yeah.
Or you know, because there's a captive audience, and their social media platforms obviously can directly market the book to their followers. I think just a fraction of the followers would actually buy a book, though. There's
yeah.
But yeah, that's a good point. That's a salient point. Whereas someone beavering away for years, produces a masterpiece after 10 years, and isn't even on Facebook.
I know.
And sends that out. You just got to hope you find the right editor in the right place whose stock has value in a company that says, I'm going to publish this new author, come hell or high water, you know, and I really believe in this book. So it can still happen.
Yeah, it's just which path you want to pursue. And I've spoken to a few traditionally published authors, and I was like, well, I suppose the perk is you haven't got to worry about your own marketing. And they're like, oh no, you still need to be on all the social medias. And like, I was like, I thought that's what they were for.
No, if you're a mid-list author,
I
would say the marketing budget is probably close to zero.
Wow.
So you've got to drive publishing, the way the kind of pyramid, the front list is everything. These authors get huge advances, and they get the marketing spend, because these authors are the ones that most of them generate the money, particularly the ones with big backlists. 80% of publishers' money income comes from backlist, I believe, and the big brand name authors who produce books year after year, you know, they're obviously the priorities. They're the most important assets to a publishing company, most important authors. And publishing isn't that well staffed.
Really?
No. I mean, I worked for a mid-sized publisher, Virgin. I think we had we published so many books a year. We had 36 staff.
God, that's so different.
I personally oversaw, was head of fiction, 84 books a year with one assistant, sometimes on my own.
I don't even know if I can read 84 books a year.
That was an extreme form, but some of my colleagues would, you know, in non-fiction, with illustrations and indexes and plate sections, they might do 12 books a year and share an assistant.
Oh, wow.
You have that, the time and energy is finite, the staff. So obviously the focus has to be on the big front list books in the catalogue each year, and in the different seasons. So if you're a mid-list author or a series fiction author, you know, you're going to be doing your marketing, spending a lot of time in social media and author events of various descriptions, and trying to get on Happy Goat Horror.
Yeah. Well, you've got a guaranteed place for every book released on Happy Goat Horror.
Well, the thing is, this is the main thing for me. You did ask me, I think earlier, about marketing. Is I cannot put a price on it. It's readers like yourself who recommend my books to other people, other readers with an interest in horror or who read horror. So that is what has kept me going for so long, more than anything. Some of my books were published as a big deal. Apartment 16 and The Ritual. House of Small Shadows had a tube campaign.
A what? Really?
London Underground campaign. The Ritual and Apartment 16 were in the Smiths charts, and some of the books were in supermarkets. So Pan Macmillan did really publish my earlier books. They made an effort. But generally now, I think if you're a serious fiction writer or on the mid list, you got to do it yourself. And some authors, I know American authors who spend their entire advances on marketing.
Yeah, I can see why now.
Try and get their books into the bestsellers to sell enough to get another book deal. You know, it can be brutal.
Yes, that's one of the realities, I guess, of a life of a full-time writer is there isn't really a safety net. Like if you have like a traditional job and you're protected by certain things, you've just gotta, just keep pushing forward with it. Circles back round to what we said right at the start of the conversation. There's never enough hours in the day.
Yeah, and I mean, where I am now, because I don't get advances, I've gone from the old way that publishing is accounted, which was advances and a small royalty provision that earns out your advance, you hope. I'm exclusively firm sales, and no, I don't allow returns. If bookshops and libraries take the books, and fortunately they do, I don't allow returns. I don't allow high discounts. And I was told no bookshops would ever touch Ritual Limited books. That's not being true. But everything is dependent upon firm sales. I live or die by people reading the books.
Yeah.
Firm sales. And I much prefer it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be part of some gamble, some lottery, rolling the dice, you know. No, it has to, the books, people are interested in the books and read them and recommend them, or they don't.
Yeah. Were you scared making that sort of like jump across? It
was huge because I turned down, I think it was 3 2-book deals. For the Reddening +1.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what the +1 was. It became Cunning Folk.
Yeah.
But I published the 2 collections then. It was a huge step over an edge, and I just thought you're going back into the underground.
Yeah.
But it's a different kind of underground. And I thought after 2 collections, I need to try a couple of novels and never look back.
Yes.
Because the Reddening now, it's been out 5 years. I think that's my 3rd best-selling novel, horror novel.
Really? Yeah, pretty good. Very scary.
I mean, the Ritual and Apartment 16 obviously were published as a big deal, and a lot were printed and a lot was sold into the book trade. I think the Apartment 16 was reprinted twice in the first month. Again, it was a different world. That's 15 years ago. So much has changed since then. But over 5 years, steadily, through kind of word of mouth, there's only so much I can do in terms of marketing. That book, I think it's now, in the UK, definitely, it's gone past last days.
Wow.
Shouldn't be possible, should it? For an indie press run by me with 9 freelancers with some help from my wife. Shouldn't be possible, but it shows you what is possible.
Yeah, and I think as well as you've got very consistently high standard of work here, Adam, with your catalogue, and I think people buy into you as well. You've created, I don't know if you meant to do this, but you've created like quite a nice little reading community around your own work. So I have found other reviewers that I follow because I was looking for Adam Nevill reviews. So Mers from Harpies in the Trees, I came across her channel because I was looking for reviews of your books, and she's one of my favorite book reviewers. I watch all of his stuff now, and it's like generated like this little sort of reading, reviewing, writing community that are all connected because of being fans of your work. So it's I'm so
I
happy.
didn't know that. I didn't know that. Thank you for letting me know. That's
Oh,
really cool to hear. Wow.
yeah, it's like, and I'm so happy to see Ritual Limited doing well, because it's a courageous step to decide I'm turning down traditional book deals to do this, and it must feel a bit like screaming into the void before you start to see the payoff of it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a risk, but it's 9 years on, 7 books out.
Mhm. Is it
And
9
every
years?
year it's grown. Sorry?
It's 9 years. It's been 9 years.
Let me just 60.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is number 9.
Oh, I'm
2016 it began. I had one book still under contract that I delivered to come out, which was Under a Watchful Eye.
Mm-hmm. Oh, scary.
Pan Macmillan. But the kind of decision, the big decision I made, I guess it was early 2016, late 2015. I thought I'm doing it, and I was really excited by the idea of being more entrepreneurial and getting some control, and and doing publishing my short stories myself. There was all these opportunities there suddenly that hadn't been there, several years before.
Yeah, it's a whenever I've stopped asking like authors that are successful, I've stopped asking them like how they sort of got their way in now, because I realized through talking to several people that everyone has got a completely different path into publishing and selling books, writing, and whether you've got an agent or not or whatever. I don't know any two authors that found their agent the same way.
Yeah.
And writers always ask, like, how did you get your agent? Just like, and I asked Ramsey Campbell some questions, and he just said it's changed so much since he first got into publishing. How do you advise someone new, because they're not going to have it's changed so much, you can't follow the same path anymore necessarily.
Yeah.
I gotta let you go. I realize I've kept you long, Adam, but I do have
one. It's all right. It's been good. It's been good. I'm here for you if you have any more questions.
Oh, that's a dangerous thing to say to me. I was an hour before we started, I was saying to my husband, I have so many, I'm going to have to prioritize my questions.
Yeah, I just don't know about the patience or stamina of your viewers.
Well, maybe we can do a part 2 at a later date.
Sometime.
Convince you to come back. But I do have a last question, and this is really serious. I want you to know that there's no judgment if you don't know the answer to this question.
Okay.
I've asked everyone I've interviewed this, and so far no one has known. Do you know what this is?
Could I place it in a cartoon or book?
No.
It looked. It's some sort of Cyclops creature.
It is, yes.
I couldn't give it a name. It looks like, is it one of the aliens that came out of
No.
Simpsons or something?
No. Oh, I could see it being in The Simpsons, but no. So after we stop recording in a second, I'll explain this to you.
Okay, no clue.
It's become a thing now for these author interviews. I've asked everyone, and I'm offering a prize to anyone in the comments that recognizes this and knows where it is. Ramsey Campbell said he thinks that I've imagined it into existence because no one else knows where it is. Yes, I'll explain that to you in a second, but I will let you go now. And thank you again so much for being here. It's just like a real highlight of all of my Happy Goat stuff to get to speak to you and host a video with you and everything. So yeah, thank you so much for all your wisdom.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope there was something of interest or value.
Definitely to me, and I'm sure everyone else.
Thanks very much for your evangelism.
Oh, thank you. I try.
And your appreciation of my twisted imaginings.
Yeah, we get a lot out of those books, Adam. Thank you for the nightmares.
I hope there'll be many more in years to come.
Yeah, me too. There's plenty more trauma for me to experience with your books.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Oh, good. That's good to hear that. Okay, well, we'll sign off now. Goodbye, everybody.